On the 4th of October 1967, something unusual occurred in Nova Scotia. Hundreds of people witnessed a strange object that fell into the waters of Shag Harbor. This incident, like many others, falls into the category of unexplained phenomena, the origin of which remains a mystery to most. The object glowed with bright lights and slowly descended toward the water, attracting the attention of everyone around. That night, the sky over the Canadian province was cold and windy, but the stars shone brightly, creating a contrast with the unusual flashes that soon became known as the Night of the UFO. One of the witnesses, 12-year-old Chris Stiles from Dartmouth, was about to go to bed when he accidentally glanced out the window. What he saw shocked him forever. Along the shoreline, a strange orange light flowed. "I had never seen anything like it before," he recalls. The slightly foggy weather made it difficult to distinguish details, but Stiles, grabbing his jacket, ran outside to get a closer look. He was one of the first on the shore and saw a strange orange sphere that was 20 meters away from him. The color was like that of intensely heated metal, he describes. The object hovered above the water at a height of about 4 meters, breaking the silence. "I felt a chill, and after a few minutes I ran away from there." While Stiles sought shelter, the strange object continued to circle over Shag Harbor, leaving unforgettable impressions in the memories of the witnesses. "At 12 years old, I experienced indescribable fear for the first time in my life," he says, emphasizing how this event changed his perception of reality. An hour later, in a small fishing town on the southern side of the Peninsular Peninsula, strange flashes were also noticed. 18-year-old fisherman Laurie Vickens was driving home with 3 friends when an unusual object in the sky caught his attention. "We were heading to Woods Harbor through Shag Harbor," he recounts. "After passing the post office, we saw a flash in the sky, then another and another. There were a total of 4, yellow and orange in color." Vickens tried not to lose sight of the strange flashes. "The object began to silently descend at a 45-degree angle," he adds. "It seemed to move along with them, but when they reached the foot of the hill, the object suddenly disappeared." A few kilometers from that place, 18-year-old Norman Smith, returning from a party with a friend, also noticed a glow in the sky. "At first glance, it was clear that the unusual light had an extraterrestrial origin," he shares. They stopped by the roadside, and Smith got out of the car to get a better look at the flashes. There were 5 of them, and they were high in the sky, like 5 orange moons lined up from the smallest to the largest. With each passing minute, Smith became increasingly anxious. "I was very scared. I didn't know what it was, and I had never seen anything like it in my life," he admits. Meanwhile, Laurie Vickens and his friends continued to observe the unusual object. Soon they saw another bright flash and heard a sound resembling the whistle of a falling bomb. They felt that the object was attacking the port, and the friends rushed to the shore. "For about a minute we climbed up the hill. From there we managed to see the light in the water," Vickens recounts. When they reached the water's edge, they saw a light that resembled a hemisphere of a yellowish hue. "The first thing that came to mind was to call the police and report that we were witnessing an airplane crash," he recalls. At that moment they were convinced that it was indeed an airplane crash. Vickens returned to the car and drove to the nearest telephone booth to report what had happened. On the night when the mysterious event occurred, Laurie Vickens called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, known as the RCMP. The clock showed 23 hours 25 minutes when the duty corporal answered his call and heard Vickens' excited voice. The police initially assumed that the callers might be under the influence of alcohol, but Vickens insisted that they had not been drinking. The officer only clarified the number of the phone booth from which the call was made. The skepticism of the police officer quickly turned to caution when, after the conversation with Vickens, other calls began to come in from residents of nearby communities who were telling similar stories. The police had no choice but to believe in what was happening. Soon they called Vickens back to confirm their location and arrange a meeting. Vickens provided his coordinates and added that they were continuing to observe the situation. By this time, Norman Smith had already warned people about the appearance of the mysterious object over the port. When Vickens and his companions arrived at his father's house, he came out to meet them on the street. Together they watched the strange objects in the sky. Soon they heard the sounds of police cars. Smith headed after the police car to the parking lot by the shore where a crowd of local residents had already gathered. There were about 16 people at the scene, including police officers who were watching a beam of light descending to the surface of the water. Everyone present, both the townspeople and the police officers, saw a dim yellow-orange light at a distance of about 250 meters from the shore. Around them, there was complete darkness, and the only discernible element was the light on the water. They observed this phenomenon for about 10 minutes, climbing to the top of a hill to get a better view. Everyone believed they were witnessing an aircraft crash. At 23:38, one of the police officers called Halifax to the Central Rescue Service to organize a search and rescue operation. The police officers also contacted the nearest Coast Guard station, and the lighthouse keepers raised the alarm. That night, one of the lighthouse duty officers received a message about searching for an object that had crashed in the harbor. Meanwhile, the police officers began their own investigation. They set out to the presumed crash site on local fishermen's boats, and the townspeople actively participated in the search. One of them approached the house of Vikens, and her husband, looking out the door, saw a police officer. They were informed that some object had fallen into the water in the harbor, and it was likely an airplane. The police officer urgently needed their boat, and he was in a hurry. Later, on his way home, Vikens met a local fisherman who excitedly said that they needed to help find survivors of the crash. Vikens could not refuse and, together with the fisherman, headed to the scene. They hurried to the dock, got into available boats, and began to row as fast as they could to rescue someone. By that time, it was already around midnight. 2 fishing boats quickly disappeared into the darkness while beams of rescue searchlights glided across the surface of the water. The search began, and they meticulously looked for debris on the surface, but found nothing. The people in the boats were in a depressed state, preparing to see the wreckage of the airplane and floating bodies, but instead they discovered something astonishing: an orange soap foam that formed a long strip on the surface of the water. There was no doubt that the appearance of this mysterious foam was related to the object that had fallen into the water. Norman Smith attempted to take samples of this substance for examination. Making a circle, the boat re-entered the foam, and he found a small vessel, which he carefully submerged in the water, right into the foam. When he lifted the vessel, he discovered that it was empty. There was absolutely nothing in it. This witness, a fisherman with many years of experience, noted that he had never seen anything like it. He had fished in rivers, lakes, and the open ocean, but the strange foam that gradually disappeared into the dark water was unfamiliar to him. The most astonishing thing for him was the absence of any debris at the crash site. If something had fallen into the water just a few minutes ago, it had completely dissolved. Everyone present hoped to find at least some evidence of the crash or aviation disaster, but there was nothing at the site. Absolutely nothing. They remained there all night, scouring the area within a few kilometers in hopes of finding anything, any debris, but they were unable to discover anything. The rescue service requested flight movement schedules from the Airspace Monitoring Center in Moncton, New Brunswick, and in the northern bay of Lake Ontario. It was necessary to check if any civilian or military aircraft had gone missing during that time period. The data obtained unequivocally confirmed that there had been no aviation disaster, and no planes had disappeared from the radar. The rescuers realized that this was not an aviation disaster, and that they were searching for something that defied rational explanation. Many began to realize that perhaps this was a UFO. The residents of Shag Harbor understood that the dark coastal waters had swallowed a terrible secret in their depths, but no one knew exactly what it was. Shag Harbor is a small fishing town on the southwestern coast of Nova Scotia, so small that it is hard to find on a map. However, everything changed on the 4th of October 1967, when, according to local residents, an unidentified aircraft fell into the harbor waters. From that moment on, the events occurring in Shag Harbor began to be covered by newspapers around the world. Within a few hours, local fishermen, police officers, and the Coast Guard were exploring the harbor waters with one goal: to find debris. By the next day, many people were plagued by doubts and terrible conjectures. One witness noted, "I think everyone that night had the feeling that something was being hidden from us." Soon, news spread around the world that no traces of a crash had been found. Official authorities provided no comments, which instantly provoked various rumors. It was rumored that a UFO had fallen into the water, but no one knew for sure what it was or what it looked like. People were very frightened and wanted to know what awaited them ahead. Could such incidents happen again? Would anything else fall on their homes? And what was happening at all? In the end, the Rescue Service Center refuted the information about the plane crash. In the morning of the 5th of October at 10 hours 20 minutes, the Rescue Service Center sent a telegram marked urgent to the headquarters of Canadian law enforcement agencies in Ottawa. The telegram contained testimonies from eyewitnesses and police officers. The phenomenon in Shek Harbor was referred to as a dark object, but the most important aspect was that it was designated as a UFO. It is worth noting that the first terms of UFO were used not by the eyewitnesses of the crash, but by the authorities conducting the investigation. By the evening of the 5th of October, the military began to address the incident in the port. After reviewing the telegram from the Rescue Service Center, Squadron Commander William Benn sent urgent messages to the headquarters of the Canadian Naval Command with instructions to conduct an immediate search operation at the site of the incident. If the mysterious dark object was not found on the surface, a team of divers should join the search who might be able to find something. The Naval Command sent a group of divers from the Halifax Navy. On the 6th of October, they began their search, diving from the deck of a patrol boat. In such a small town as Nairsh, one can hear the most diverse rumors. But when the military arrives with divers and with a presence, when people see that a search is underway, they understand that the situation is serious. The divers surveyed an area of 3 square kilometers. Initially, the search team circled the site of the incident, then marked it with buoys and began their operation. However, their efforts were unsuccessful. The inspection revealed only an incredible amount of plankton in the water. The searches were conducted formally, using ordinary flashing handheld flashlights, which did not allow for close approach to the area where the divers were diving. While they explored the depths, the small fishing town became the epicenter of public attention. On the 7th of October, Canadian television cameras captured the divers during their descents. This topic took center stage in the news broadcasts. Canadian periodicals received fragmentary information about the strange incident. Among them was the newspaper Chronicle Herald, with which journalist Ray McLeod collaborated. That night, he was working when the editor-in-chief called him and informed him about the incident in the port. The editor noted that there were many eyewitnesses, including police officers, and McLeod needed to find out what exactly had fallen into the water. It was a serious assignment, and he set out to fulfill it. However, when McLeod attempted to gather details, no one was able to provide him with any information. He did not hear anything specific from the official authorities. Neither the Canadian Police nor the Search and Rescue Service knew what exactly had fallen into the waters of Shek Harbor. That night, not a single crash was recorded, which became a true mystery. The lack of information fueled McLeod's curiosity, and he decided to conduct his own investigation. As he himself says, "Any schoolboy will tell you, the unknown excites the imagination." It was particularly surprising when the authorities claimed they could not even speculate on what it might have been. It was then that McLeod enlisted the services of a military informant. The informant directed him to Ottawa to Commander William Benn, who was conducting investigations into UFO cases within his air division. What McLeod learned about Shek Harbor came as a surprise to him. William Benn informed him of several instances of UFO contacts that had actual confirmations. His account was published in a newspaper, which became a sensation. On the 7th of October 1967, the material prepared by McLeod was printed on the front page of the ultra-conservative newspaper Chronicle at Garrod. When he saw his article, he thought, "My God, what have I done?" He did not expect the headline to be so loud. The title of the article was printed in huge letters and added fuel to the fire. Rumors began to spread throughout the city once again. McLeod's article was discussed in all corners of Canada, but it intrigued the residents of Shek Harbor the most, where the search for the unidentified object continued. On the 7th of October, the Naval Command sent 3 more divers to the crash site. The search continued while the townspeople awaited answers that never came. McLeod believes that the results of the investigation were carefully concealed. "We were not informed of anything. Some officials even said they were forbidden to discuss the topic," he recalls. The residents hoped that soon they would be told that it was indeed an aviation accident and that the plane had been found on the ocean floor. But nothing of the sort happened. On the 8th of October, the military concluded their operation. Official sources reported that the 3-day search yielded no results. 5 days after the crash, the townspeople remained in ignorance. However, the end of the investigation in Shag Harbor was just the beginning of a case that was becoming increasingly convoluted. October 1967. Dozens of people became witnesses to the fall of an unknown object in the waters of the port city of Shag Harbor on the southern coast of Nova Scotia, in Canada. Local fishermen combed the shoreline, trying to detect debris on the surface of the water, while Navy divers explored the seabed. Suddenly, the search was called off. There was a feeling that something was being hidden from the people. Many sensed it. Spending so much time and effort on a trip and receiving no explanation seemed very strange. There were no answers, and a new wave of rumors spread with extraordinary speed. It was said that perhaps something had indeed been found. Among the local divers, one confessed that they had retrieved something from the bottom. Some mysterious object that no one could accurately identify. The most incredible rumors circulated, and this was typical when things were left unsaid. Speculation began. During the 60s, rumors of UFO sightings and similar unknown objects were considered a side effect of the Cold War. At that time, nuclear confrontations between the United States and the USSR had reached their peak. The two superpowers incessantly accused each other of testing the latest weapons, and secret operations were conducted in the North Atlantic. All these facts heightened the atmosphere and intensified interest in the strange incident that occurred just a few years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. This only fueled curiosity, and people began to propose various theories. Perhaps a secret American craft had fallen into the water, an aircraft or a satellite, or maybe it was a Russian craft. Journalist Ray McLeod tried to get to the bottom of the truth. For a time, his articles appeared on the front pages of the reputable newspaper Chronicle Herald. However, his efforts to shed light on this story yielded unexpected and disheartening results. McLeod had important information for the newspaper's editor, but he advised him not to delve deeper into this story, as it should be handled by someone from the reporters who had long been working on this topic. It was easier for them to establish contacts, as they wanted to thoroughly investigate the incident. In the end, the matter was handed over to David Bentley. McLeod knew that Bentley had met with scientists to gather information that would refute the facts of UFO sightings. He only consulted those scientists who held a dismissive attitude towards so-called UFOs and denied the very possibility of their existence. Bentley's main ally was the astronomer priest Michael Bourke Gaffney, who, being a Jesuit, viewed such phenomena with skepticism. He had his own point of view, and he always tried to calm the human passions surrounding unidentified objects. A few weeks after the unusual incident, Michael Bourke Gaffney held a public discussion about the events in Shag Harbor, attempting to soothe the people. He explained that 94% of so-called UFOs are ordinary natural phenomena, such as meteorites. While the priest was presenting his arguments, Stiles was curious about what exactly William Benn's group had discovered. There were rumors that something specific might have been found in the harbor waters. Stiles asked Bentley why he wouldn't go to Ottawa to see Squadron Commander William Benn, to which Bentley replied that such a person did not exist, and there was no such squadron in Ottawa either. He advised Stiles to forget about that story. Was the Chronicle Herald under pressure from Canadian authorities? McLeod realized that this story would never make it into the newspapers. It was hard to accept that he could not use his connections and contacts to convey the truth to the people. After all, they had the right to know what had happened there. The journalist felt helpless when he could not do so. Soon, representatives from Canadian television crossed the border of their country and headed to the University of Colorado to meet the renowned physicist Edward Condon. Condon and his group were conducting research for the United States Air Force under a contract worth $500,000. The scientists were tasked with providing an independent assessment of the UFO phenomenon. Condon had observed similar phenomena around the world and became interested in the events in Shag Harbor. It was necessary to determine whether the United States Air Force should investigate the strange occurrences. From the perspective of ufology, this event was intriguing. Despite having significant resources and highly qualified personnel, Chris Stiles believed that Condon and his team did not give due attention to this case. The matter was handed over to Norman Levin, who called ATAV, the Canadian Police Headquarters, and the Naval Department several times. He was informed that a full and thorough investigation had already been conducted. However, as Levin later admitted, it was a mistake to believe that. Can one trust the authorities? The incident in Canada became one of 59 UFO phenomena that Condon and his team included in their studies. Case number 34, the final report, was presented by the scientists on the 31st of October 1968 and contained 900 pages of information. In conclusion, it was noted, further investigation is deemed unwarranted. Condon summarized the report with the words that over the last 20 years nothing had arrived on Earth from space that could be classified under the science of ufology and that would add to scientific knowledge. Chris Stiles pondered that serious scientific research into UFOs always ends the same way, as the criteria are quite strict. Often, when such events occur, it does not matter what definition you use and how precise and accurate you are. In the end, people still do not believe. This is exactly what happened with the story in Shag Harbor, where no one insisted on answers. Thus, the case in the Canadian port became yet another unsolved mystery. News of the incident gradually moved from the front pages to the back. Within a month, it was forgotten. People continued with their daily lives, eating sandwiches and going to work. However, 25 years later, the investigation into the incident in Shag Harbor took a new turn. Thanks to several sensational discoveries, it became clear that it was too early to close the case. In October 1967, more than a dozen people witnessed a UFO falling into the waters of Shag Harbor. Even after 25 years, many questions regarding this case remained unanswered. It was an extraordinary event. Some object landed from the sky onto the water, but what exactly it was remained a mystery. One of the witnesses from that night, Chris Stiles, still cannot forget what he saw over the port. He noticed the UFO from the window of his home. Later, in 1992, Chris saw a television program that changed his life. He recalled the events in Shag Harbor, as at that time, no one denied that it was a real UFO, including officials. By that time, he had almost forgotten what he had seen in his childhood, but he decided to conduct his own investigation. Stiles requested documents related to this case from the Canadian National Archives and from the Department of National Defense. After a few weeks, the documents arrived at the main library in Halifax in the form of microfilms. A meticulous task began. As Stiles reviewed document after document, he realized that the bureaucrats who compiled them had not overlooked anything. The microfilms contained information about UFO sightings in Canada from 1965 to 1981. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack. For several weeks, Chris studied the microfilms, and in one of the official documents, he clearly realized that he was looking at an important letter with a story. The inscription UFO he encountered 3 times on 3 envelopes, all of which pertained to the incident in Shag Harbor. Stiles realized that he was in possession of unique documents. Had he stumbled upon something that the government of Canada had been meticulously concealing? Chris Stiles understood that he needed help. He reached out to his colleague Don Lejeune, and together they began to investigate the events that occurred in Shag Harbor. For a year or a year and a half, Stiles gathered materials and sought out witnesses, immersing himself in the subject with enthusiasm. Ultimately, he involved me in the research, and I could not refuse him. A thorough examination of the declassified documents allowed for the reconstruction of the details of that night, the 4th of October 1967, and to recall everything down to the smallest details. These documents had a colossal impact on me, literally knocking the ground out from under my feet. As he reviewed them, Stiles realized that the Canadian military knew much more than they had let on. He was astonished that the military took the fact of searching for an object of extraterrestrial origin so calmly. This could be considered official confirmation of the existence of UFOs. Stiles discovered that similar events had occurred not only in Shag Harbor. Witness testimonies had been collected from various corners of Nova Scotia. Unexpectedly for himself, he stumbled upon a report that could be considered a reliable source. It was titled Pilot Testing of Civil Aviation. That evening, at 7:15, two pilots from Canadian Airlines, Captain Pierre Charbonneau and First Officer Robert Ralph, were flying flight number 305 at an altitude of 5 kilometers over the southeastern part of Quebec. They saw out of the left cockpit window an object that struck them with its appearance. It was an elongated colored object resembling a kite, which hovered just above the plane near its left wing. Experienced pilots were perplexed, watching as the strange object hovered in the air, and then they saw several flashes. According to their testimonies, when they began to take any action, the UFO disappeared into the clouds. After some hesitation, the pilots decided to make an official report about the strange incident. For a civil aviation pilot, this was not easy. He could face ridicule from colleagues and problems with management, which could make him the subject of mockery. Continuing his search, Stiles stumbled upon an unexpected source of information. At St. Mary's University in Halifax, he found documents collected by Father Borg Hafni, who was skeptical of Canelo and publicly denied his appearance in Shag Harbor. He was fortunate that these secret documents ended up there, as there had been no mentions of them in the National Archive or with the Canadian Police. The documents of the Canadian Police collected by Father Gaffney contained numerous details about that night. One of the reports included the testimony of the captain of the fishing vessel Leo Mercy, who commanded 18 crew members. The vessel went out to sea, and unexpectedly they saw 4 UFOs. Mercy detected the objects on radar and recorded everything. However, there was some ambiguity in his report. He mentioned the search for UFOs in Shelburne, kilometers north of Sheet Harbor. This document contained the following phrase: "I saw an object similar to the one they were searching for in Shelburne or Sheet Harbor." This allows for the conclusion that searches were simultaneously conducted in Shelburne. The question remained, could the UFO, after its crash, have somehow left Sheet Harbor? If this indeed happened, was it related to the fact that Shelburne was the location of a Canadian military base? Or, like Sheet Harbor, was it surrounded by an atmosphere of secrecy? Throughout the 60s, military research in Shelburne was conducted under the guise of the Institute of Oceanography, which was connected to the Cold War. Primarily from the base in Shelburne, there was eavesdropping on secret radio transmissions concerning the maneuvers of Soviet submarines in the northern part of the Atlantic. The recording of engine sounds was carried out using computers that were state-of-the-art at the time, allowing for the capture of important data. This was done in preparation for possible conflicts that could arise during those times. There was a question: could the Canadian authorities, using the technical capabilities of submarines, determine the location of the sunken UFO? Simultaneously, rumors arose about whether the United States Air Force was conducting secret searches in Shelburne while public attention was focused on the events in Sheet Harbor. Chris Stiles, continuing his investigation, decided to find and interview the divers who explored the depths of Sheet Harbor. On the 4th of October 1967, he witnessed a strange phenomenon in the sky over Nova Scotia, and thereafter attempted to determine what exactly had happened. Stiles examined declassified government documents that spoke of the search for a UFO that supposedly crashed into the waters of Sheet Harbor. The official authorities claimed that they found nothing at the crash site, but Stiles had reason to believe that the divers might uncover some secrets. Not everyone agreed to speak with him, but those who dared shared interesting information that differed from the official statements of the media. On the 9th of April 1993, one of the divers agreed to give an interview on the condition of complete anonymity. He shocked Stiles by revealing that they had indeed discovered something underwater, but not in Shag Harbor. According to him, the search had moved to Shag Harbor, and they knew that the object was located on the bottom, 40 kilometers from the military base in Shelburne. It was possible that the UFO was avoiding encounters with people by moving underwater along the coast of Nova Scotia. If this was true, it meant that the Canadian military was conducting secret searches in Shelburne and hiding this from the public. The diver put Stiles in a difficult position by stating that this story had disturbed him. He had classified government documents in his hands, but such searches were not mentioned in them. Stiles tried to understand whether the military's search in Shag Harbor was merely a ruse to distract attention from the real searches. The diver's account became increasingly incredible. When the divers arrived at the site, they submerged in the water above the supposed object and saw it, as well as discovered another object that, according to them, was assisting the first. Stiles did not know how to react to this information, as it completely contradicted the official data. The diver reported that U.S. Air Force ships and Canadian vessels had dropped anchors over the objects and were tracking their every movement. When he and his partner submerged, they saw living beings surrounding the fallen object. However, the Canadian diver's story did not end there. He stated that the U.S. Air Force had studied the objects for 7 days, but the operation was abruptly halted due to the appearance of a Soviet submarine that crossed Canadian territorial waters. In this critical situation, the ships had to set out to intercept the submarine. After some time, both UFOs began to move toward the Bay of Maine, surfaced, and flew away, thereby thwarting the operation to apprehend them. The question arose: were there any other witnesses who could confirm this fantastic story of the diver? Had anyone seen these mysterious objects that appeared over Shelburne? On the 11th of October, exactly 1 week after the events in Shag Harbor, people once again noticed a strange light in the sky. It was seen by a family living 55 kilometers from Shelburne. At the same time, they observed the so-called Lachlan Cameron and saw how 2 glowing objects rose into the sky above Shag Harbor and disappeared into the distance. This testimony completely coincided with the diver's account, and it is impossible to ignore it. The question remains: was the diver right? Did an alien spacecraft really crash and fall into the waters of the harbor? Or is there another explanation? Former watchman Mika shares his experience. On the second day, I found an object in the shape of a cylinder. I realized that this was an unusual cylinder. I had never seen anything like it before. He describes that the cylinder was approximately 80 centimeters long and about 150 in diameter. Part of the cylinder was charred and wires were sticking out of it, and they smelled. They smelled terrible. Watchman Banks notified the Canadian Transport Department about his find, a strange cylinder on the rocky shore of Bon Portage Island. In the department, he was advised to be more careful, to package the object, and to submit it for inspection to an officer at the dock. This object must have been very important to them, as an officer was sent by plane all the way from Virginia, he adds. However, what was so unusual inside the cylinder? Despite working for the federal government, the answer to this question remained a mystery to him. The memories of those days still remain a mystery for everyone, he says. Some speculate that these events may be connected to secret military experiments from the Cold War era. I suspect that it was some kind of unmanned aircraft that they wanted to return to their base. Why not? I think it was some kind of controlled object that either fell on its own or was shot down. I believe it was an aircraft. An American military aircraft. Nevertheless, his opponents argue that an object capable of functioning both above and below water can only be of extraterrestrial origin. Even now, in the era of invisible aircraft, there is not a single device that has both aerodynamic and hydrodynamic functions, he emphasizes. The question of what this object was remains open and continues to intrigue many. Whatever it was controlled by an intelligent being, and it was extraterrestrial, he adds hopefully. Perhaps someday the military archives related to secret tests will come to light. If that happens, it may shed light on the mysterious events in Shag Harbor that occurred on the 4th of October, 1967. We can only wait. Meanwhile, the memories of people who saw the strange object fall into the ocean that night are becoming increasingly vague. I still gaze at the sky and try to discern anything that resembles the object I saw that night more than 30 years ago. I would so much like to know what it really was.